like to call this special council meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
Your Worship, all members of council are present this evening with the exceptions of Councillor Butler and McDermott.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, Councillor Noyes, you have a motion for us to go into closed session?
Does now go into closed session at 5:32 p.m. to discuss the following. Pursuant to Section 239, brackets 2C of the Municipal Act 2001, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality of local board, supposed to say our local board? REYMCA of Niagara, Fort Erie location.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. From closed session, and Councillor Zanko, you have the resolution.
Yes, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dubanow, that council does now rise and reconvene from closed session at 6:02 p.m. with report that staff proceed as directed.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. And the next resolution, Councillor Butler, you have is relative to the confirmatory bylaw.
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Lubberts. That bylaw number 134-2019 to confirm the actions of council at its special closed session meeting held on October 15th, 2019 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Third and final reading by Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Butler. That bylaw number 134-2019 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. And Councillor Dubanow, you have the final resolution.
I do, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Noyes that council adjourns at 6:03 p.m. to reconvene into a regular meeting of council on October 21st, 2019.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. So that's going to take us then into the council and committee meeting, and we're going to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Anishinaabe people. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
Your Worship, all members of council are present this evening with the exception of Councillor McDermott.
Thank you. There are no announcements this evening. There is one addendum, and that is an attachment to report IS 34-2019, which identifies the location of the retaining wall that will be constructed. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, there's a series of budget meetings scheduled for the 2020 budget, starting with the first meeting on Wednesday, November the 6th, 2019, which will be the capital budget and forecast. The second meeting will be Wednesday, December the 4th, 2019. That will be water and wastewater operating budget and user fees analysis. The third meeting, which I thought we were going to be combining with the January 22nd meeting, it relates to the library and the EDTC board. Presuming that is rolled into the meeting on January 22nd, that will deal with the general levy operating budget and assessment analysis. The fifth meeting, if necessary, will be January the 29th, 2020. All of the budget meetings are at 6 p.m. They're all in the Town Hall Council chambers. If we proceed as scheduled, we will be doing the following budget bylaws: Monday, December the 9th, 2019, preliminary capital budget; Monday, January 20th, 2020, water and wastewater budget and rates; Monday, February the 10th, 2020, the general levy budget and general capital budget; and if necessary, we will go into March if the January 29th meeting, more than the January 29th meeting is required. So that takes us to presentations and delegations. And the first delegation, sorry. This is under corporate and community services. So how about if I hand the chair over to Councillor Dubanow?
Thank you, Your Worship. And we have a presentation by Tamara Coleman-Laurie, Director of Community Impact, United Way. Step forward, please.
Good evening, Mayor Redekop and Town of Fort Erie councillors. I'm enthused to be here with you this evening to share with you a little bit about the work of United Way. We're aimed at making local issues unignorable and obviously supporting the people of Niagara to be all that they can be. So United Way Niagara is a charitable organization that partners with local stakeholders, donors, volunteers, our labor partners, and organizations to identify and address our community's most pressing needs. Our goal is to create opportunities for everyone in our community and to help them live better lives. We do this by strengthening our community, by engaging individuals, and by mobilizing collective action. United Way Niagara focuses on achieving 3 core goals each and every year. Firstly, we raise as much funds as we can through our annual fundraising campaign. Secondly, we strategically invest in funding a network of local programs, services, and special initiatives. We build and mobilize our community through specific development strategies, all with an aim to improve the quality of life of people across Niagara. We work at the local level to identify the areas of greatest need in our community and invest in solutions that create real change. We invite our community to give to the United Way Niagara campaign this year. Our fundraising goal is $5.25 million in 2019. 100% of the donations received remain in our community. When you give to your community through United Way, you give to over 100 programs and services across Niagara and help to provide funding to organizations that desperately rely on United Way. When you give to United Way, you allow the agencies to focus on what they do best, and that's delivering quality programs and services and not focusing their efforts on raising the funds to deliver their programs. We have exciting match programs this year to leverage donations to United Way. New donors who give are matched dollar for dollar by Ferguson Neudorf Glass, a generous local donor who knows firsthand the importance of United Way to agencies. Gales Gas Bar has also committed to match new donors who give a leadership gift of $1,200 annually, or current United Way leaders that will increase their gift by 10% or more. Every gift we receive helps to change the lives of vulnerable people in our community. We invite the town of Fort Erie and these residents to join us on our journey to make Niagara the best it can be. United Way invests funding in 3 priority areas. We are changing lives by focusing on moving people from poverty to a life of possibility, helping kids to be all they can be, and building a strong and healthy community. We help meet people's basic needs and invest in housing initiatives, food security, employment, and financial literacy so people are afforded the opportunity to have a better future. We invest in giving children and youth the best start possible, ensuring they are ready to learn in school, build critical life skills, and ultimately reach their full potential. And we create inclusive and vibrant neighborhoods where everyone feels a part of their community, is engaged, and connected to supports that improve their quality of life. We are making local issues unignorable. We take a leadership role with the hundreds of agencies across Niagara to bring about collective change. We advocate for our community's most complex and pressing needs, and we shine a light on key issues such as poverty, housing and homelessness, mental health and community well-being, hunger and food security, vulnerable children and youth, seniors and individuals living with disabilities, social inclusion, and community connectedness. Based on recent data, many of the certain indicators provide an overview of pressing needs for the town of Fort Erie. Many residents live below the low-income measure, have a household income under $20,000, pay more than 30% of their income on rent, are unemployed, have no high school diploma, and 32.42% of Fort Erie children are considered to be vulnerable for early learning compared to their counterparts across the region. Of importance to note are some neighborhoods that require special attention. There are certain areas of Crystal Beach, Fort Erie North, and Fort Erie Lakeshore that are heavily affected by poverty and limited access to the supports necessary to improve their situation. Investments are needed to address income equity and access, employment and skill development, as well as the practices to improve the opportunity for children to learn successfully and equally to their peers. Currently, United Way funds 103 programs from 48 different agencies across the region. We provide millions of dollars in funding for programs and services that reach over 110,000 of our Niagara neighbors, friends, and families. Often folks who have nowhere else to turn, are in crisis, and need a hand up to help them get to a better place. We strategically invest our donors' contributions in the most impactful areas, such as programs addressing the social determinants of health, the root causes of poverty, and lifelong skill development. We address the immediate human needs and innovate to improve the future of Niagara. Specifically in Fort Erie, United Way funds programs from 26 different agencies that are providing support to residents of Fort Erie. I won't read the list for you. However, these agencies are on the ground providing essential support for the folks who live in this town. United Way knows there are other additional gaps in our community, and we continue to identify and address these needs through special investments. United Way Niagara invests in a network of after-school programs that create a sense of belonging, improve social skills, provide academic support, help youth to make friends, and build confidence for over 500 kids every year. Our Welcome Home Kit program provides those in need with a packed kit of basic yet essential items needed to feel comfortable and independent in their new home. And these kits are waiting for them when they arrive. To date, over 3,500 kits have been distributed across the region. Our Hygiene Kit program provides essential hygiene items for people living in shelters, precarious housing situations, and experiencing homelessness in our community. Thousands of these kits are distributed each year. And our Backpack program provides kids in need with a backpack filled with supplies required to be prepared to learn on a level playing field with their peers and to succeed in school. Nearly 3,000 kids in 2019 received a backpack. In addition to the programs, services, and special initiatives that United Way funds, we also invest our resources toward other critical systems. United Way has been a pivotal partner in the 211 Ontario system. We annually invest nearly $70,000 toward improving the access to information, support, and immediate help. And we know that when our residents have the opportunity to dial 211, they can gain the information necessary to help themselves or their family members. Over the past year, United Way Niagara has been leading the facilitation of the Niagara Food Security Network. We engage more than 100 food-related service providers across the region and are working to develop a strong network aimed at ensuring that all of Niagara's residents are food secure. We also support local community gardens, engage volunteers in substantial day of caring projects, and collect and distribute essential and often overlooked feminine products through Tampon Tuesday. Well, at the core of what United Way does is raise funds. We are foremost a leader in our community, practicing true collaboration and partnership and bringing together key stakeholders to mobilize collective action. We are a steering committee member of the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network. We advocate for policy and systems level change, are a member of the Feeding Fort Erie project, partner with Niagara Connects and In Communities. We manage the Niagara Prosperity Initiative across the region and lead large community tables such as the Fort Erie Service Providers Network and the Niagara Executive Directors Forum. Well, I shared with you all at the beginning, United Way raises funds through our annual campaign. We invest in more than 100 programs and services. We invest financial and human resources in special initiatives that address other key community gaps. And we participate in and lead community tables that bring together the key stakeholders to mobilize that collective action in our community. And this creates a tremendous impact across our community. But we can't do it alone, and that's why we host our annual campaign. And we invite you to give to this year's campaign and to lend your volunteerism and your expertise to create the Niagara that we all want to see. Thank you for your attention this evening.
Thank you very much, and I'll open the floor to any councillors who have any questions. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow, to the presenter. Thank you for your presentation and your enthusiasm. I'm wondering with the stats that you presented, how current are they? Like, were they collected like in 2000?
The stats relating specifically to Fort Erie and the percentages are directly related to this 2016 census data. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your presentation and all the work you do in the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now I return the chair to His Worship.
Thank you. There are no public meetings this evening. That takes us to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to move the consent agenda? Councillor Zanko. Are there any questions with respect to any of the reports in the consent agenda? I just had one question with respect to IS 37 2019. And there was a reference in the report on page 19 to solar panels. Is that, is there a possibility that we would be installing solar panels on some of the municipal buildings, the roofs of some of the municipal buildings? Mr. Cook? Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Mayor, right now that's not contemplated. We are looking at, alternative solar measures, such as some of our traffic signals going off grid.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, all those in favor of the items in the consent agenda, none opposed, that is carried. That then takes us to planning and development services, and that's you, Councillor Noyes, I believe.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Planning and Development Services is now in session. That brings us to a presentation of delegations. Michael Barker, President of Shift Landscape Architect, RE Albert Street Park Master Plan.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Mike Barker, and my office, Shift Landscape Architecture, has been working with the town for the last 6 months or so, developing master plans for both Albert Street and Douglas Park. So tonight, we'll take a look at those final plans that can serve as the basis for some decision-making for you in the near future. Let's see. There we go. There has been some shared elements and similar engagement pieces for both parks, so we're first going to look at those, then we'll look at the design for Albert Street, followed by a unique engagement piece that we undertook for Douglas, and then we'll finish by looking at the Douglas Street Park. A bit of brief history on the project. We started working on the project in April of this year. We developed some high-level preliminary concepts for each park, which I reviewed with town staff and community advisory committees. From there, we made some refinements and developed 2 concepts for each park, which we presented at an open house in July. And then from that point until now, we have made further refinements to get us to the plans that we'll see tonight. So the first thing we did for both parks was a general site assessment, so a review of existing conditions, some research into history, demographics, and similar sorts of things that help us to get an understanding and get grounded in the existing condition. We produced these maps that you see on the screen, outlining some of the opportunities and constraints on each site and mapping our existing conditions. Following that, the next thing we did was develop multiple high-level concepts for each park. So these types of schematic plans, which offer some programmatic possibilities and start to suggest relationships between elements without being too prescriptive or starting to suggest form. It's about relationships. So you see on the screen 4 for Albert Street, and then we produced 3 as well for Douglas Park. And these concepts allowed us to bring forward something to a few community advisory groups, namely the Mayor's Youth Group and the Accessibility Committee. So we met with them along with town staff, and based on that, this is the feedback that we heard from them. Both groups very much in favor of the park projects. Both agreed that the parks are due for a rethink. We can see on the screen the feedback from the Accessibility Committee. They felt design should be AODA compliant, smooth, firm rolling surfaces throughout, and that shade in the form of a built structure is important. So not just relying on trees, as they take quite a while to mature and provide that shade. The Mayor's Group, Mayor's Youth Advisory Group, again, very much in favor of the project. They Unique spaces were important, swings, Wi-Fi and charging stations, a stage area specifically at Douglas that came up, shaded seating areas, natural playscapes, and multi-use courts were things that they felt were important. And so after meeting with the mayor's group and the accessibility committee, we applied their feedback along with feedback that we got from town staff to develop 2 plans that we would bring forward at the open house. So those are generally the shared processes for each park. So we'll now look at the feedback for Albert and then the resulting master plan based on the information that we received. So at the meeting, at the open house, we brought forward 2 concepts for each park. On the screen you see on the left a plan, and then there was some supporting imagery. That's concept 1. Here is concept 2, again, a plan and supporting imagery. And then we had a 5th panel of what we'd call character images or precedent images that sort of ask the questions. You see some structures that are traditional, some that are more contemporary, asking people for their choice. So we had people mark up the panels and the designs with stickers of things they liked as well. There was a questionnaire that asked specific questions about the design. And then, of course, through conversation, we were able to get to this point where we got an understanding of the sorts of things that people wanted to see in their park or addressed through the design process. So I'll just focus on the popular items towards the bottom. People felt the park should be green, so meaning trees and gardens, active recreational opportunities, open lawn for unprogrammed play, areas for passive gathering and seating, a shade pavilion, screening at the perimeter of the park, between the park and the existing residential properties. That came up at our open house meeting. Creating a more inviting entry to the park and allowing access and circulation around its entirety was important. And then opening up views from the street edge to the back end of the park was something that people felt was important. So based on that, on our engagement process and meeting with the various groups and then that open house, we've been working since then to refine a concept. And this is our final master plan for Albert Street. And I'll just take you on a bit of a tour. I was hoping I'd be able to point, but if we just assume that on the left of your screen is Albert Street, we'll start there and work our way back. So the design suggests opening up the front of the park by making a more prominent central entry point. So you see the parking, and then we have an entry trellis. The site is organized along that central spine, which leads to spaces along it. And we almost view these as park rooms or park spaces that hold individual program elements and activities. As you enter the park along the central path, you come to a playground at the top, and then a play lawn or a lawn that's available to sort of community programming. So this is going to lend a very active quality to the park as people are entering, a nice sort of atmosphere, as you can imagine, kids playing at the playground and activities happening on the lawn. As you can continue in, there's a shade pavilion in a plaza-like space, so a hard surface. And then adjacent to that is a tree grove, so an area that's going to allow for people to sit under the shade of trees. And these 2 pieces in combination allow a place for community gatherings, but they also, if you can imagine on an everyday use, allow a place for parents to be while their kids are at the playground, or allow a place for people that are using the sport court, which sits just below the community gathering area or the shade pavilion in the center there. And what we're doing with the sport court is we're layering many different activities together. So we're layering pickleball and basketball and some schoolyard types of games, so Foursquare, hopscotch, those types of things. And this is really a contemporary way of providing elements for a wider variety or a wider range of possible users without the park having to be completely taken over by asphalt sport courts throughout. So a way to layer things and opportunities for people together. As you continue on towards the back of the park, the central pathway or spine terminates in a seating area. And this is really a space for people that want to be in the park, but be removed from the activity. So they can have a prospect out onto some of the activity, but not necessarily have to be right in the heart of it. And we heard at the community meeting from some of the older folks in the neighborhood that this was something that they would like to see, an opportunity to be separated from some of the vibrancy and energy of the playground. Surrounding the park or our park rooms, you can see a pathway system. So this acts as a bit of a circuit, so it's going to allow people the opportunity to use the park as a bit of an exercise space, but it also nicely contains those activity spaces. So we end up with a very interesting kind of park space where people can move around the perimeter, but the activities are happening internal to that. And then lastly, the last thing I'll point out is the vegetated buffer or screen around the park. So this gives us an opportunity to provide the existing residential properties some screening and a buffer from the activities of the park. And again, at the public meeting, this came up as something that was quite important to them. So we'll just look at a few sketches. This is a view of that entry pavilion, entry gateway at Albert Street. So as you enter the park, you have this sort of vibrant landmark-like element.
Barker,
Yep.
we don't have your presentation on our computers right now, so
I'm sorry.
Janine, if you're able to take a look at that. We don't have any pictures on our screens right now.
I'm currently talking to Kelly Davis. So I'm hoping he'll be able to.
Okay.
Alternatively, I can print off copies.
Well, no, we have, no, that's fine. We've got the picture of the park in our report. So that's fine.
So we're 2 slides away from being done, Albert, and then we can, the cost estimate up, so maybe we want to have discussions about that, and maybe that gives us time for Douglas, if you want to do that. Continue? Okay. So there's a sketch of the entryway. This is a view of the central gathering space, so you can see the pavilion in the background, and then this idea of the treed seating area. And we're imagining that this can have some permeable surface, so we could get some water infiltration on the site, but it also provides a really unique opportunity for a seating space. And then finally, this is a view of that north end seating, that small seating area at the north end of that central spine. So that's it for the design elements. This is the cost estimate. We're at $840,000. There's nothing really exorbitant or odd that jumps out to me. The biggest single number is our playground at $150,000, and $150,000, and that's really where we'd expect to be on a park of this scale and size. So that's what I have for you. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, we can look at Douglas.
So I'm reading the list here. It's been a long Monday, I know it's Tuesday. Any comments or questions? Mayor Redekop.
Thank you. I just had a few with respect to this. I'm quite familiar with the area in the park.
Yes.
And this isn't a very large piece of property. It's a couple of acres. So that I think the notion, we've got a photo here with a couple of guys running or jogging. I don't think they're going to be jogging in this park. It might be part of their route, but this isn't going to be where they're going to be running. And in my opinion, the play areas, play lawns, those would be large enough, I suppose, for younger children, but I'd be surprised if you would get teenagers playing football or kicking a soccer ball around in an area that size. They might, but they're more likely, I think, to go over to the old fort, which has a larger open space.
I think the play lawn towards the front would be big enough for playing catch, say ball, right. Maybe a couple people throwing a frisbee, kicking a soccer ball, but none of the spaces at Albert Street are meant to, say, provide space for a soccer game or a football game. Right. More smaller places that are able to support what we'd refer to as sort of open-ended recreation. So people programming it on themselves and figuring out ways to use those spaces themselves.
One thing, if I might understand, one thing that I know is very popular with respect to these neighborhood parks, and I don't think there's one several miles from here, is a splash pad. because the water that's close by is the lake, and for little children, that's not really ideal. So I'm wondering if you had contemplated a splash pad at any place in this park.
So splash pads came up. You'll see one in Douglas in the concept. There is one. I think, so the reason why it isn't included, it was part of our studies. It really came down to budget. In order to have the splash pad, we would need to free up a lot more money. Probably would be starting at $100,000 more, and it just seemed through discussions and through revisions to the concept that it didn't seem like it was appropriate for the scale of park. That really was the discussion. Based on our engagement pieces, splash pad was always high, certainly with, say, the Mayor's Youth Advisory Group. At the community, at our open house, it didn't come up as much for Albert Street as it did for Douglas. At Douglas, it was a very prominent part of the list of asks.
Well, I noticed that there wasn't an overwhelming turnout for these
Right, yeah.
public meetings. So I think in total you had, 8 people?
Yeah.
For both of the parks?
Yeah.
That's a little disconcerting in the sense that we're trying to get the community engaged and involved, and the outreach, I think, was helpful, particularly the outreach that you did on the next presentation where you were looking at the park, Douglas Park.
Yeah.
That was impressive that you met with students from the elementary school. So I don't know that I would take an awful lot or give an awful lot of weight to the meager comments that you received at the public open house. You also didn't receive a lot of feedback from residents who were given notice of the public meeting.
No,
I think there were 125 invitations sent out on the one and 115 on the other. So that was a little disconcerting. I noticed at one point you had there was a reference in one of these concepts to bocce, and I don't know, that's a favorite sport of some people, but I think bocce in town, other than in some of the traditional Italian neighborhoods or some people like me who grew up in the neighborhood, it'd be like lawn bowling. We used to have lawn bowling courts in Fort Erie, but that seems to have gone by, and I don't think you're suggesting that you could play bocce on the play lawn.
Right. So the concepts that we brought forward for the public open house are not necessarily here's concept A, here's concept B, but they're to elicit feedback. So we may even bring forward things that we're not necessarily sure if they will work, but we want to see people's reaction. So bocce, as you'll notice, didn't show up in either of the two final master plans because we got feedback, that exact feedback. Whereas other communities we work in, bocce it's sort of something that everybody wants because it's something that say that 20 to 30-year-old group often doesn't have things in parks to use, and they like that sort of communal activity, sort of that type of thing. So the point being is, though, through the community feedback process, we learned that bocce wasn't something that would be used in the parks.
But it could be played on the
Certainly on the grass, yeah.
Then the one final question, if I may, Madam Chair, is I noticed that there was provision for a portable toilet at the Douglas Park. Nothing with respect to that here.
That's correct, that's right.
And was there a reason for that? Again, the cost, or?
Not so much the cost as it just, I think for Douglas, it came up at the public meeting as a significant issue, washrooms at the park. And I think generally the size of a park the size of Albert Street, we wouldn't include those because the draw is so close that people would tend to go to their home instead of use a portable toilet. So
thank you very much.
Any further comments or questions? Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wonder if we could get the slide with the pavilion.
sure.
The one with a picture of the
Do
pavilion.
I do that?
The question I
Yeah.
have with that is, will the pavilion be situated so that if they have any public events there and where there might be a small crowd, that the crowd would be looking at the main stage
So just let me come back to the plan.
Look at it, I see the tree area.
Yeah, so if
Yeah,
you
the
see the
pavilion.
shade
It
pavilion,
doesn't front on any of the play areas.
well, it doesn't front necessarily, but if there was some sort of event, you could imagine somebody standing at that pavilion and facing out towards this play lawn where there could be a gathering of people. So it was intentionally central, or similarly, there could be people gathered on the sport court, facing the pavilion if somebody was standing underneath the pavilion. And it sort of was intentionally located centrally in the park so that it has those opportunities to serve as a central location.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if we might take a second look at that and put the tree grove towards Albert Street and then bring the pavilion so that it can front on that play lawn. That way, if you do end up with a crowd, and the reason I ask this is because at Waterfront Park in Crystal Beach in the summer, we have our concert series there.
Yes.
And this year, because we had a couple of local bands from this part of Fort Erie, there was a lot of ask about why we're not having these types of concerts in other areas of Fort Erie, this end of Fort Erie.
Okay.
And if they decided that maybe they would do it somewhere else, we just need to make sure that if we're gonna do something like that, we have a lawn for everybody to
Yeah.
be at, and they wouldn't be obscured by the trees.
Understood, yeah. I think that's good to know. That never really entered our radar in that this park, it wasn't necessarily a spot for the type of event that you're describing. It was more if 10 families had a community barbecue, that sort of thing, and the pavilion would be the central point. Like in this concept, we're not proposing a stage. It's just that plaza-like space that, again, provides that sort of open-endedness so the community can program it as they sort of see fit. But if that sort of event is something that you imagine could take place, then I think looking at how that's situated would be an intelligent thing for us to do.
Just wondering if you can do that. If it works, fine. If not,
Yep.
that's fine too.
No, we can take that under
Yeah, 'cause we
consideration.
never know what's gonna happen in the future.
Certainly, yeah.
Any further comments or questions? I have one. In regards to there not being a splash pad,
Yes.
I am concerned about that. I think that
Sorry?
I am concerned
Oh, yeah.
that there's not a splash pad in this particular park. There's really nothing close to it for residents or the children to walk to.
Yeah.
I would probably forego some other things if we take some things off the list and add a splash pad. I would think that to me, a splash pad would have been a priority.
Yeah.
I know that when I take my grandchildren, they all love the splash pad. So
Every
that's
park,
just a comment.
every park we design in every community we're in, splash pad is the number one thing that people want, and at the end of the day, it just comes down to the individual community and how many splash pads they imagine there being. In that, typically in the communities we work in, not every park gets one because of the cost and the infrastructure, the consumption, the amount of water it takes, and so forth. So if a splash pad is something that is deemed necessary, then I think there's a way to have it in the park without without significant changes to the layout, but also without it detracting from other areas. We'd have to subtract because there's really not enough space, but it could be done.
Thank you. Going to bring us to Douglas Park now?
Yep. Okay, do you see this now, or?
No, so
No.
I've been advised by the CAO that we should be changing places with the directors because their monitors are working. Ours aren't. In order for ours to come up, they'd have to reboot the system, which is going to take a while and apparently is not advisable. Yeah, so we'll just have to suffer through the next one. But we do have much of what you're going to be showing us. we have in the report.
It's all in the report. It's just streamlined a little for this, yeah. There's,
It's back. Thanks, Tom.
okay?
Yes.
Okay. So as I noted, we shared some similar processes for both parks, but because of the proximity to Douglas to Peace Bridge Elementary, we suggested a unique strategy in which we would engage the students. And the town thought this was a good idea and brought it forward to the school, who also thought it was a great idea. So we visited them and had an hour-long engagement session with the students. We had students from grade 3 to 8 join us, with a few groups having multiple classes. So we had 20 students total, which was a great number for what we wanted to do. And the students had the opportunity to review a presentation in which we showed examples of different elements and program opportunities. And this was done to gather their feedback and also to illustrate some of the possibilities for this kind of space, for a park at this scale. So it was both a chance for us to hear their likes and dislikes, but perhaps also a way for us to stimulate their imaginations for the next part, which was having them design a park space themselves. So they produced these types of drawings of just general, non-specific parks. Essentially, the task was to draw themselves playing in an ideal park, or their idealized park. But then in groups, they also had the opportunity to produce designs of Douglas Park on aerial photographs like this. So we ended up with 3 groups producing these 3 really exciting and conceptually driven, from the eyes of a child, master plans, which was really, really quite fun. And here are a few of the things that the students hope to see in the park. And most of their ideas, frankly, were very realistic and possible. There were a few roller coasters and dirt bike tracks, but even those sorts of things can allow us to start to ask them what it is they like about those experiences and try to design that in the park, or at least enter into a discussion with them about what it might be that we can do in a park that would give them that sort of experience. So I think it was a very successful engagement piece. For us, we got a lot of really exciting ideas for the park, but it also allowed the kids to be involved in city building at a really early age, which benefits us all. So following the student engagement and then meetings with, again, the accessibility and committee and the mayor's youth committee, along with the district school board in this case, due to its proximity to the school, we produced our 2 concepts that we brought forward to the open house. So in a similar process to Albert, we had 2 concepts, a plan and supporting images, and then a 5th panel with stickers. So here again, based on using stickers in the questionnaires in the general feedback we received, and I won't go through it all here, but this is the information that informed our decision as we refined our concept. So this is the final master plan for Douglas, and I am going to zoom in, although I guess that's not going to be of much good to you when we do that. But basically, the site is divided into to 3 spots. It's the Birdie Street edge, the active center or heart, and then a parking lot towards the northern edge. It's a design which allows for a wide range of users. It's accessible with hard rolling surfaces throughout, varied activities from passive to active, strong connection to the school, both through physical form, but through programming possibilities, educational possibilities. It provides a presence along Birdie Street, and there's a variety of play elements, including natural and traditional. So this is our zoom-in first view. You see a more pronounced and accommodating entry at the corner of Birdie, and this will allow the park to have a stronger presence at the street, which benefits the park, but it also benefits the streetscape. As people are entering town along Birdie Street, there's going to be a more active sort of node there. Similarly, towards the center of the park, there's a set of steps which provides a prominent entry point from the sidewalk and the street parking. And then as you move to the west, there's a 3rd entry that leads down to a space we're calling the Overlook Garden. And this is a space that, similar to Albert Street, is going to allow people to be in the park, but be removed a little bit from the activity. And we heard from some of the older folks at the open house meeting that that's something that they would like the opportunity to do. So a few sketches. This is the entry at Birdie and Aberdeen. Again, it's meant to be an open, sort of inviting plaza-like space. There could be public art down in the future installed. This second one suggests what the steps could be. So more than being just a pragmatic way to address the grade change, this becomes a space unto itself. So people can sit and chat or meet friends, watch activities on the playfield, those types of things. So again, we're generating some activity and some vibrancy towards the street edge. So this shows our active heart or active center of the park. There is a stage, in this case, with a pavilion roof and some associated seating for small cultural events or performances from the school. Again, we have a multi-sport court with basketball and pickleball layered together along with some painted games. In this case, we have a playground, a more traditional playground, although we do call for a zip line in this park, and that came from our student engagement. And that's not as far-fetched as it might sound, because most of the play manufacturers do include a zip line in their offerings these days, so we can do that. To the north of that space is our natural playground. So this is an opportunity for kids to play on logs and stepping stones, use their imagination a little bit more in their play as opposed to traditional playground, which is a little bit more prescriptive. We are suggesting a splash pad or a water play element. What we are suggesting is that it's very similar to what you have in Ridgeway, so the ground sprays. And we're doing this for two reasons. A, it has play value, but we also get a water feature from it. So if there's not people playing in it, you're having some sort of event in the park, some sort of community gathering event, there can be the water fountain going and it has some sort of architectural or design interest to it. And then lastly, in this plan, I'll just point out that we are allowing for screen porta potties based on feedback that we received at the meeting. So this is a view of our pavilion at the central gathering area, sort of relaying the character and the ability of this to host some programming. But I think in the detailed design stage, this could really become something quite exciting and become an opportunity to develop a unique seating space. So it's not just a stage that has to house or hold events, but it can be used for everyday use and become a draw and almost like a magnet within the park that people want to be there and a place for people to hang out while they're in the park. This is a view of that splash pad idea, water feature element. And then to the left, you see our natural playground. Again, the idea of logs and stepping stones. And you see something, or you don't see, but there's something labeled a treehouse. And this, again, came from our student engagement. And of course, we can't build a treehouse in the park, but we can develop something that is very much like a treehouse and provides the same experience that allows kids to get up off the ground, use their imagination that they're in a spaceship or their heads are in the clouds or whatever it might be. But so again, through that student engagement, we got these really exciting ideas that I think through detailed design can become something quite exciting. So this last zoom in is of the parking lot. We are allowing for 27 spaces with 2 accessible. Importantly, what we've done is tried to pull it as far south as we can while maintaining the alignment with that cross street. And we've done that in order that we can get a significant plant buffer or tree buffer between the existing residential properties and the parking lot to the north. And then finally, our cost estimate. Again, I don't mean to sound flip about the numbers, but there's really nothing that, we're at 1.8 million. There's nothing that jumps out as sort of exorbitant. It really, in this case, compared to Albert, it's the size of the park. So we're allowing about $165,000 for earthwork and grading. So essentially setting the park, and civil work, setting the park up and draining the park. And then the circulation system is obviously quite a lot more extensive, just based on the scale of the park. And then the last thing I'll note is that in both parks we're allowing $150,000 for traditional playground, but here we're also allowing $80,000 for the natural playground features. So with that, I'll answer any questions you have, or if I can't get them to you tonight, I'll get them to you as soon as I can.
Councillor Butler.
Madam Chair, I just have a couple of questions. So from my understanding, you're going to have Toboggan Hill, correct? So is there an opportunity to transform that park in the wintertime to have an open air skating rink? Because now they don't require any.
Yeah, let me just try get back to our plan. I think that'll be the So the toboggan hill we're suggesting is actually just the existing grade that is there now, and we learned through discussions with the community that that's what it's used for. We didn't actually realize that until while we do these things, we learned that it is used for that, so we've left that area with the most slope available for that. So to answer your question, the play lawn that could be used for soccer or football in the summer months could be turned into a skating rink in the winter months. I'm from Guelph, and within almost all parks now, there's just a hose bib, and then the city supplies a hose, and that's it. The community groups do the rest, flood the rink. London does it quite a lot in quite a few of their parks now. So yes, that's absolutely a possibility. It would be very simple to do. And then it just becomes a question for the town, whether you have some management or you say, no, it's community groups that do it.
Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. I was out at the open house and had an opportunity to talk with the residents, and there was a lot of excitement about both, but in particular with Douglas, I know we have a water play area. I'm just wondering if you could clarify, this isn't an actual what we would call splash pad per se. It doesn't have like that play equipment and like the buckets that dump or anything like that. It's more like a water feature that's kind of fountains that go off periodically or something like that, or am I understanding that correctly?
That's right, yeah. The intent would be that what we'd call ground sprays, so there aren't any of those overhead elements like the things spraying or the buckets dumping. Very similar to Ridgeway. That's the best way to explain it, as in the plaza that's there. So it's kids can play in it and they'll run through it and splash through it, but it has what I would describe as more of, as well, a water fountain-like quality to it.
Thank you. And if I may, Madam Chair, just with some of the feedback from other members of council and the mayor up here, I'm almost wondering if maybe we can look into something like that even for Albert, maybe smaller scale, and just with this being a centralized sort of, I would call this almost like an anchor park, like almost something that will attract people to it. If it's possible to maybe even look into more of the splash pad concept. I wouldn't no costs yet, but certainly with the feedback we're hearing up here, that seems to be the direction we're going. I noticed two other elements too, which seem fairly unique, at least for Fort Erie, but I've seen them elsewhere. You have a fitness equipment area, which I know Niagara Falls has embarked upon recently with some of their parks, as well as a natural playground. And I know that the regional daycare on Central Avenue, when they did their renovations, when they expanded the property, they actually did a natural playground, and it was very nice. The children loved it. I'm just wondering, is there anywhere that anyone in the community can go look at other than the closed off daycare that you can't get into easily? Are there any other examples in the region, anywhere like that? If anyone's interested to see what a natural play area looks like and the benefits of it, if they can go take a look, if they're interested, I'm just curious. I
will have to look into that and get back to you.
I apologize for putting you on the spot.
No, I don't.
Go ahead.
I would guess that perhaps. So just if I can clarify, the exercise area that we're proposing is a product called Trek Fit.
Yep.
And so it's not like you might imagine the bench press machines or those sorts of things with moving parts, but more calisthenics, push-up bars. So it really has a sculptural aesthetic to it as well. That there are certainly some down the highway a little bit towards, there might be some in Hamilton. In Niagara Region, I'll have to check. And then as far as natural playgrounds, there will be some. I'll just have to get you specifics.
No, and if I may, Madam Chair, I appreciate that because there's some unique elements to this park that we don't have here in Fort Erie that I'm aware of. And it's very nice to see that happening and that move towards natural play areas and kind of the return to nature rather than the whole, gray, gravel sort of stuff.
Right.
I was very happy to see that. And from what I saw during the open house, the community also had an interest in that, and we're very happy about it, especially the kids. I love that idea of the treehouse. That was really cool. No, I appreciate your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Any further comments from Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just looking at your slide here. Again, thinking about events in the park. And I see from what I'm looking at there, it looks like the shade pavilion would be fronting towards the trees and fronting towards Aberdeen. I'm just wondering, you know, if you're gonna have, somebody decides to do some events there and they get bigger and they get bigger crowds, I'd hate to see that we ran out of space.
So
I'm
this-
wondering if you could reconfigure that so that it would be facing, the stage area would be facing your soccer field. Then if you have something in the evening, then, and then you draw a crowd, you will have ample space.
So in this case, I think what we've provided is actually a stage that allows for 3 different sizes of events. So we have the stage that faces this small area here, so that would be for a smaller gathering. You had a medium-sized gathering. You now start to gather people here, and the stage still works. And then if you had a very large gathering, the stage now faces out onto your lawn.
And they will front on all 3 sides, and, okay, all right.
That's right, yeah.
That's good then, yeah.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor Redekop?
Just question the slide that shows Birdie Street and the sledding hill.
Yes.
And all the concrete walkways. So the concrete walkway actually limits the sledding hill, does it not?
It cuts through the middle, but the majority of the grade that allows for sledding, decent sledding, is to what I'm looking at the left on the screen, to the west, I guess it would be, of that central walkway. The rest of the slope is fairly gentle, and so we've tried to maintain that open area to the left and as a run out into the field to the left.
There's still a paved walkway there.
So there is a central entry, yeah.
And so I guess my question is it necessary to have all these walkways?
I don't know. I think as I talked about this, the steps are not just a walkway. It's a space that allows for gathering. It allows for the park to have a presence on Birdie Street as opposed to just having sort of entries. It's about creating some vibrancy and points of gathering in the park and creating a bit of energy and sort of community gathering points within the park. So that's the intent, as much as with the central space, as much as it is a way to access the park, it's also envisioned as a place for people to sort of meet up and enter.
Well, I understand that, and I can see that you've got 3 points of entry on Birdie Street. People are just going to walk into the park from Aberdeen if they walk, or if they park on Aberdeen, because people will still do that. And how did, if I might, Madam Chair, how did you arrive at the need for 27 parking spaces in the parking lot?
It's what we can fit. It's based on zoning, the requirements of the park, but we went to as many as we could fit based on the feedback from the community that when there is a soccer practice, or that's currently, I guess, only soccer practices, that there's a substantial amount of pressure on the street parking in the surrounding neighborhood. So we wanted to try and get as many as we can in that space without having to start coming down into the park. So that's really the without creating I guess a massive parking lot.
Just wondering about the need for that many parking spaces, because this is just a small practice soccer field, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Is it being reduced in size from the current space?
No, it's the same size as what's there currently in the main field. There's currently the main field and then a few to the north of that.
Right.
But this is the same size as the main one.
Okay, thank you. I'll save any other questions for the report. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Zanko?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barker. I think both designs are, they're really nice, and I'm happy to see them come forward. Looking at both, one of the concerns I also have about Albert Street Park is that there isn't a splash pad or ground sprays, and I don't know if you considered when reviewing Albert Street in particular that we're very lucky in the area. We have beautiful parks like Waverly Beach and the Old Fort that has a lot of green space, but not much of a kid focus on it. So when I look at Albert Street, I agree. It's a gorgeous concept. I'm not sure how you're going to fit it all on that piece of property, but I too would like to see more of a kids focus on there, simply because the adult focus is found on nearby parks. So I was thinking that once the report came, I could probably bring that up. But my question to you primarily is, if there is a splash pad or ground spray, does that kind of mandate the need for a porta potty on the site as well?
So my suggestion would be that if it sounds like you want a small splash pad on Albert and something larger at Douglas, if that's the sort of direction, I would suggest yes, we do need then something, because it's going to now attract people outside of what we are attracting now. And then if what you're talking about is a larger splash pad at Douglas, that starts to ask the question, do we need more infrastructure? So do we need now a larger washroom than a couple screen porta potties, because we're going to, again, draw people from a bigger catchment than what we would if it's a smaller sort of community focused sort of splash pad. I think we've sort of been envisioning these from the start as neighborhood parks, and it sounds like we have a neighborhood park and maybe more now a city park with this one with the larger space, which just from a sort of naming them suggests that it's has more intensive use, larger space, larger sorts of elements to attract and be able to house more people.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, I wasn't proposing that we enhance the Birdie Street splash pad. I was simply proposing that an addition to Albert Street be made, and wondering if there is a splash pad if one porta potty is needed.
Yeah, I would suggest that's the case, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further comments or questions? I have a few.
Sure.
Again, please take this the right way. I see that I was at the accessibility meeting when we discussed and we looked at the pictures, and I think this is an opportunity missed in regards to the neighborhood is very unique in that within a walking distance, you have 2 nursing homes and the hospital/urgent care. And when I'm looking at this, and one of the ones that we did see had a lot more activity where you have the overlook garden. One of the designs that we were looking at. And if I can recall the comments in that there was some shaded area, like some shade there. And we thought that would be wonderful for people in the nursing home whose loved one wants to take them somewhere. And, you know, they could watch the kids play, or if there was an event, they could watch the event. Now I'm looking at this and there is no shaded area in the overlook garden at all. So many of these people require some shade if they're going to be there for any length of time. So I don't see that need being met here. And on top of that, the other thing, it would be nice for them to have seen some of the kids playing, the kids on the playground, particularly if their grandchildren come and great-grandchildren, whatever. I think you're getting the idea. And it's so far removed from where they'll probably be situated. Granted, I guess you could push the wheelchair up and move it around and things, but one of the plans you had, it was more focused, that it just made, it said, well, this would be great. The seniors are finally being considered so close to nursing homes, so close to the urgent care. It'd be great to be able to take your loved one, you know, across the street and there. And that's lost on this plan, to be perfectly honest. I don't see it on this plan. So I'm somewhat disappointed in that. And also I look at your gazebo, or your shaded area, and there's stairs. And again, there's no shaded area beyond the stage. Again, I'm thinking again for the neighborhood where you know, again, nursing homes and a hospital where people may want to come. So I'm disappointed in that. And I'm also wondering, where is the school playground in this? Like, how close? Because, okay, I haven't been there, but before, the playground was almost adjacent to where the current soccer field was. I mean, they may have moved it by now.
The school's playground?
School's playground. Where's the school's playground in this?
Removed from so there's a soccer field and then the playground. There's actually, I think there's multiple playgrounds at the school, so they have one that's sort of the northern edge of the school, and then there's one that would be on the western edge of the school.
And unless they put fences up, there was never any fence. Like, you could be, like, I know, you know, my kids were playing in that, and the ones that wasn't playing would go to the playground. That was very close. So is it still like an open concept there?
Well, there's actually a fence there now.
Okay.
It's sort of odd fence in that you can just walk around it at one end. But through the discussions with the school board, that's something that through detailed design would be addressed, whether or not they can remove that. It's their policy on most of their schools to put up fences, but they did agree that this is a unique condition where perhaps the fence could come down or it could be dropped in certain areas. But they also don't want, so they want the ability to use the park if they want to have a drama class at the stage or that sort of thing, or science class. But they don't want kids to use the playground during school hours because then they can't monitor it, but they're responsible for those kids. So they had some suggestions and challenges that they wanted to look at as the project moved forward through the detailed design, because they had to work out with their sort of facilities what they're allowed to do as far as fences and those sorts of things. So
Now, on the plan, you have 3 entrances off of Birdie Street. If you removed the central steps, what's the cost for that particular entrance?
we're allowing 100,000 right now.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
That brings us to report PDS 54, 2019 Albert Street Master Plan.
So moved.
Any comments or questions? Mayor Redekop.
Well, I'd like to just go back to the splash pad. I think that there's a couple of things with respect to both of these reports, and that is the cost of these parks is a lot more than I guess I would have originally envisaged, but I'm not building parks. I know that the park at Crystal Ridge will cost over $3 million once it's completed, so I suppose on a scale basis, we're building these community parks and we're looking at $750,000 to $1.5 million or more. So that I think what we need to do is give clear direction to staff what it is we're thinking we would like. The public consultation is helpful because it provides that information. We want older people to be able to utilize the parks. I like the outreach to the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee because they've got lots of ideas, and if we're trying to attract families and children to the community, we want to make sure that we've got amenities for them. So the only thing that's missing really is the splash pad, and I think it's necessary in this particular area simply because the closest splash pad to this would be Ferndale Park. So the people in this area aren't going to be necessarily going to Ferndale. In terms of sports, there's the Old Fort. That's a large open track, so I'm not too concerned about the teenagers. But for mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, fathers with little children, hot summer day, I like the shaded areas, but I think a splash pad's important. So I would like to suggest to staff that we look at that.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree with the suggestion of the mayor about a splash pad. During the open houses, there was discussion about a water feature, but ultimately these things all come down to cost. And if it's something the municipality is willing to spend money on and council is willing to agree with that, I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea. I used to live at the corner of Albany and Albert, and my son, who was very little at the time, when we started taking him to parks, we used to walk down Albert Street, and we took him to the park. But as it deteriorated, we stopped going to the Albert Street Park and switched over to the one on Barron Road. So I'm thrilled to see that this park in what is, in my opinion, one of the nicest, just with the trees and everything areas of town, to see something like this happening. I think it's fantastic. If we can budget a splash pad, I'm all for it. I think that would be fantastic for the community, and I'm glad to hear that council's kind of open to that idea and moving in that suggestion. From a lot of the input that we had from the community, I know that track around the park that the mayor had mentioned earlier, certainly I don't think you'd have people running circuits, but there were some expressions of interest about being able to walk around the park and include that as a route. I think that's fantastic. I'm thrilled to see this happening. I really am, and I want to thank all the work of staff and the consultants that they've put into this. I think it's just that park's been sitting there for so long with that slide and a couple swings, and I think it's going to be great for the community, for Garrison Village and Old Fort Erie to have a park redesign like that. So I want to thank everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. Councillor Zanko?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just further to what the mayor had said, we had heard Mr. Barker note that if there is a splash pad, then he did agree that a single-use porta potty would also be needed. My question, I guess, through you to either Ms. Hanson or Mr. Brady, is there enough funds in our parkland reserve to accommodate additions like this, or would we be scaling back on other options?
I'll let you answer that question.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair, it's certainly up to council to determine how much of the Parkland Reserve they want to dedicate to this. There are funds available. You'll see that through the budget process in November. But it's at council's discretion if you want to add more. I would say that with respect to going back to the splash pad, our current park model is to provide splash pads in community parks or town parks, but not in neighborhood parks because they're typically smaller and don't necessarily have the servicing that we do have in larger parks. But with respect to splash pads, we are looking, preferably we will recirculate the water. That gets into a costly recirculation system, but we are looking at probably between $250,000 and $500,000 for a splash pad in terms of budget.
Thank you. And further to that, what about a single-use porta potty?
Porta potties we rent through the summer. We are at Crystal Ridge Park going to introduce a covering or an enclosure for the porta potty. That's, I think, probably about $25,000, and then we rent the porta potties on an annual basis. So,
Councillor Zanko?
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mayor Redekop, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just listening to the comments about the splash pad, I'm just trying to find what it was costed at for the Douglas Park.
100,000.
100,000. So why were we talking 200 to 500,000?
I don't have the cost estimate in front of me. The splash pad at Douglas is just jets, so it's just a series of jets coming out of the ground, whereas a splash pad with the overhead features is quite a bit more. So just looking at the Ferndale splash pad, you're probably, and that was built in 2005, you were close to 100, 150, and prices have gone up since that one was installed. So anything above ground, you're starting to get into equipment similar to a playground.
So I think for budget purposes, it would be helpful if we had that information. The other thing that occurs to me is we've got the potential for a large development 3 blocks away, and I don't know where those people are going to go. We're going to have presumably a lot of older people, but I don't know where the children would go. It's not like the old days where you send your kids and they can go off the pier that used to be there. 100 years ago when I was a kid, the pier actually was almost intact. But so we're going to have a lot of people, and I don't know where the new park would go. It's not planned for the Harbortown site, and this would be the park. So I think we need to take a critical look at that. So for the budget purposes, I think it would be helpful, Madam Chair, if we could at least get a broad range of what the cost might be. It's too bad it's so small.
So with respect to Albert Street, we are looking at, we have budgeted for 2021. So we could bring that forward with that budget if you like, as opposed to this year. We don't have anything budgeted for Albert Street for this year.
Well, I think when we do the capital, we do a 10-year capital projection. I think it might be helpful if we get some information with respect to this so we can keep an eye on this. But surely if Harbortown does proceed, I guess we'll know more next May or June, then there's going to be a lot of development charges revenue generated, and there will be a need for a park. I mean, we'll have the beautiful natural park next door, but we won't have anything that will accommodate the residents like this type of park would. So I think we need to keep an eye on that.
Councillor Dubanow?
Oh, it's okay, Madam Chair. The mayor actually just kind of addressed the issue that I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to the cost. I'm also somewhat blown away by the cost again, but I'm not in the park business, so I don't know. But there are some things on there too. One of the things I think he called it a slab, a curb slab. It was like flat slabs with grass growing between, and then the kids could jump, like step from one. That was like $25,000 or $35,000, if my memory serves me. I'm just wondering, can we not kind of look at some of the things, like if you're going to put the splash pad on, obviously perhaps something else can be removed, number one, because of the area. And I wouldn't mind having some more, like it coming back to us saying, okay, maybe this, again, I'm just picking the slab concrete, which was 25 or 35,000. Would be one of the things, if I had to cut something from the list, that would be on my to-do list, or not to-do list, I guess. So I'm just wondering, when if we add something, even from for space, we're going to have to remove something, and I would be interested in what the cost differential would be, what we would be removing in lieu of the splash pad.
That's something that we will certainly need to look at. We'll need to look at it from a locational perspective as well as budget. The next phase, sort of the phasing of this process, is that we will, if council approves the concept, go into a detailed design stage. And that's where we start looking at materials and more detailed budgets and exact dimensions of different pieces of the park. And that's when we can really start to tie down the costs and look at less expensive materials. We can come back to council with a concept that shows where the splash pad would go, or council can direct staff to incorporate a splash pad in the detailed design of the park. It's up to council how you want to approach it, whether you want to see another concept or not. That's not part of our scope with Michael, but I'm sure he would be willing to evolve the concept.
Thank you. Any further comments, Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I guess my question would be to Signe. When I'm looking at our costs, and I'm not sure how, I don't remember how we did everything with Bay Beach Park, but we had, well, the Lions Club came in and donated, and Friends of Crystal Beach made some donations. And I don't see anything in here for donations, and I'm just wondering, did we reach out at all and look for maybe Kinsman or Lions or other organizations to, if they want a feature, that they could raise some money and put it in?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. That's certainly something we could do once council endorses the concepts. We do have I noted in the Douglas Park report that there is a corporation that is interested in contributing money to Douglas Park. I'm not sure of the scope or scale of it. We have forwarded the report to them, and they are looking at it right now to determine how they want to be involved in the park. So we can certainly send out feelers to other service clubs and whatnot and see whether they're interested in any fundraising projects.
Yeah, did we do that for Bay Beach Park, or did they just come forward?
With Bay Beach, they came forward.
Okay, all right. But we did.
Well, I shouldn't say that. We did reach out to a number of groups to see if they'd like to be involved in the park in any way. We already knew at that point that the Ridgeway Lions Club was interested, though.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks. Because I'm sure we could raise some money for some of the features and help offset some costs. Thanks.
And we, just one more thing, we always keep an eye out for grants, provincial or federal grants. So I think both of these would qualify for something like that. We're completely reconstructing existing parks, so that might be another opportunity.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay.
Sydney. And I'm wondering if I can turn the chair over to Councillor Butler for the Douglas Park Master.
Well, we have to vote on this one.
All those in favor of the report? Now I'd like to turn it over to Councillor Butler.
Sure, thank you. So that brings us to report number PBS-55, 2019 Douglas Park Master Plan. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Your Worship. That report is now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you. Again, I'm going to probably repeat myself here. I think this is a missed opportunity in regards to this park is so close to two fairly large nursing homes and the urgent care / hospital, who really, if you think of the area that they're in, they have rich products. The hospital, pretty much nothing, but if they can walk across and go to this lovely park, which is now totally inaccessible to them, and really there's nothing for them to see anyway. I think we've missed that portion of it, how we can meet the needs of the residents that live so close, and the family members of those residents who are, if you had a loved one in the hospital, you're always looking to take them somewhere, within walking distance, so they can, get out of off the hospital grounds and go somewhere. And this is somewhere that they could go, but it's not going to meet their needs. There's no shade for these individuals. It's not within a vicinity of where they can see anything happening. The playground's way over there. Everything's pretty far removed from where you would probably take these individuals. And I know that on the accessibility committee, I think we were almost unanimous in saying one of the designs was so pro, we thought, well, this would be great, like if this is the design that's picked, and unfortunately it wasn't. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions? Mayor Redekop and then Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, just in terms of, I noticed the budget has $24,000 worth of trees, which I would have thought would be a fair number of trees. So maybe we could get some comment from Ms. Hanson with respect to the shaded areas, because I agree, even if you've got little children, you want to have shaded areas. So maybe we could get a comment on that. In terms of the location of the playground, that's the area where most of the kids will be coming from. So I think that it tends to make sense to me. There will be some coming from Douglas Street, south of Birdie, but the majority of these kids are going to be coming from the area to the north.
Ms. Hanson, can you speak to that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, I was trying to put the concept back on the screen. We did originally have a trellis over the overlook garden, which Councillor Noyes was referring to. With the announcement of the hospital closing, we felt that it might not be used as much. So that was, I'll take responsibility. We took that out to attempt to save some money, but it's certainly something that we can add back in. With respect to the trees and the shade, there was an effort made throughout this park to create nodes of treed areas where people could sit, and we have benches under the trees and whatnot. So that was the intent of the $25,000 worth of trees, was one, to create buffering, and two is to create areas, treed areas, that tree groves, there are a number throughout where people could sit in the shade. So
that's good to hear. So we know that there's a possibility of a trellis being included to at least provide some shade there. The pavilion obviously will provide shade, and I notice you've got benches interspersed in some of these areas where there are trees, so that's fine. But I do agree with Councillor Noyes.
Thank you. Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And just to go back to the little overlook area close to Birdie Street there, I agree with Councillor Noyes' point about shaded area. I remember during some of the earlier concepts, I believe it was more extensive. I mean, it was similar in concept to the Peace Garden that is proposed for Gilmore Lodge, kind of an area to connect the hospital and people who are at the hospital or need a place to get out into the air and relax. I'm just wondering if there's been any discussions about, regardless of the status of the hospital, because we still have the long-term care homes there, if there's been any discussion about pedestrian crossings or any facilities like that to connect the area south of Birdie Street to the features of the park through you, Madam Chair, to Hanson.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we did have discussions at the open house that there was a desire to have some crossings that we discussed we would connect with infrastructure once we got a little further along into the process and look at sidewalk crossings. So I certainly think that's a possibility.
Excellent. And if I may continue, Madam Chair, thank you. Madam Chair. Going back to the natural playground and the fitness type equipment area, which I think are quite innovative with regard to what we're doing with parks here in Fort Erie. And I think that's a great idea. I like the idea of having both a traditional park and the natural playground. As I mentioned during the presentation, when the regional daycare on Central Avenue, when they put their new park in, they didn't do a traditional playground. They just went with a natural playground, and it was very, very popular with the kids. It brings you that connection to nature and playing outside, while also having the ability to play and express yourself and climb and do all those fun things. That is something I'm very happy to see. The fitness equipment area, I'm particularly happy to hear about that. There's a gentleman who I see at the Y all the time. His name is Bob. He's been there forever. And ever since he found out about this in the master plan, I can't, and anyone who knows Bob knows it's hard enough to get away from him to do what you got to do. But I have not been able to get away from him for more than a minute because he is so thrilled about the idea of this fitness equipment and the potential even to have skill competitions and stuff like that. There's been a lot of interest. I'm thrilled that we're including something like this in a park. I hope we continue to include this in other parks as it goes forward. And again, thank you for all the work you've done on this and the consultants and all your staff. I think we have a good framework to begin discussions and see where we want to go. And I'm very happy with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion carries, and I'll return the chair back to you, Madam.
That brings us to report PDS 56, 2019, extension of draft plan approval, Black Creek signature draft plan of subdivision north side of Baker Road, east side of Netherby. Roll number 2703040 055-25601-0000. Offer Canada Consultants, Jennifer Beta Agent, 9136916, Canada Limited, Young Mo, owner. On the floor for comments and questions.
Dubanow.
Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, just one question with respect to phase one. What is left to be done? They've got the site currently serviced. So what's left for them to do to start construction of houses in phase one?
Mr. Brady? Or
Turn on your mic.
is Kira here?
This was, no, Kira's not here. What's left is not a great deal. We're trying to get these things finalized. They're basically in the ground, but we do have to go to make sure that they meet their the standards that we want. And once we've done that, then we can move forward.
So this
Mayor
is,
Redekop?
yeah, this is the development that resulted in the closure of Baker Road, is it not?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing none, all those in favor of the report? Report carries. That brings us to report number PDS 57, 2019, amendment to the conditions of draft plan approval, 1788773 Ontario Incorporated, Frank, Rena, and Marcelo Petrella, owners, Cortec Group, Susan Smith, agent, South Ridge Meadow, south of Dominion Road, west of Wells Avenue.
So moved.
Now on the floor, that brings us to comments and questions. I saw Councillor Butler's hand first.
I'm the lucky draw. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions because we have been back and forth with the residents of Parker Avenue and a few of the other residents in the surrounding area, and I just wanted to get some clarification if things have been cleared up. From Burley Road on Parker Avenue, is that still going to remain stopped, or are we now clearing the pathway?
Mr. Brady?
This report changes only one thing as to what council had approved the last time. If you remember when this was before council the last time, there was some discussion about whether or not we should have an urban cross-section on Dominion Road. And I believe the mayor said something to the following to me, Rick, I think we've got this straightened out, go deal it with the region and don't screw it up. I believe that was fairly straightforward in terms of the wording. So I did, we went to the region and the mayor was correct. And this changes that one condition, and that's all it does. It just adds that one condition. So that what was open or what wasn't open the last time around remains the same.
And so just for further clarification, Madam Chair, just one further question to that. Those same neighbors were concerned about some of the heritage trees. Yes, I think so.
Actually, no cheese is being removed.
No trees are being removed. Okay, thank you.
I think you want clarification on the following. Parker, if you look at the fifth page in, there's a map which shows Parker going from west to east. And it has a bit of a dog leg in the middle. Okay. So up to where lot 43 is not being touched. So I think the large trees that are being concerned about are to the west side of lot 43. From lot 43 forward, it is being upgraded, and Parker will, through the little dogleg, continue on through over to Wells and connect through. There was some discussion about whether or not that should occur, but I think that's been resolved and it will occur. But the larger trees that are of some concern are those in front of the homes that are on Parker to the west, and they're not being touched.
Mayor Redekop?
No, Mr. Brady answered my question.
Okay, all those in favor of the report? The report carries. That brings us new business inquiries. Seeing none, that brings us to a business status report. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, planning and development services is now closed, and I'll turn the chair back to His Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. That takes us to infrastructure services, which is Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Infrastructure Services is now in session. We have no presentations or delegations. We have one report IS 35-2019, approval of budget variance of $20,000 for improvements to Brody Road, waterfront allowance improvement for waterfront access. Do I have a mover? Councillor Zanko. That report's now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say how grateful I am that staff is looking at this, because we have had a number of, I know the mayor and myself have had a number of constituents call us with respect to the entrance to the Burley Road beach. Just wanted to ask a quick question, noticing that we're going to put possibly $100,000 aside for the renovations of the pathway there. The investment of $20,000, would that be utilized this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's the plan.
Thank you. I am in full support of this report. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Being none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That brings us to new business and inquiries. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Lubberts. Today, I had an email that Black Creek Road was closed, and the residents were not notified that this is not to fall on the backs of our staff, because our staff weren't aware of it. And I know I brought it to Mr. Walsh's attention, and he got on it right away, and he did, I'm sure, express his concern and directed the developer to the proper procedure, which was not followed. So I wanted to say that first. However, it seems that some of the developers, I'm not saying this one is the only one or whatever, it seems that they prefer to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and rather follow the procedure. And what happens then is that the residents lose their confidence in the process. And particularly in this particular development, with what's gone on in the last 5 years, it's their confidence is already waning. And again, to have another road closure without any without the notification, not only to the residents but to the town itself, I don't know what consequences can be other than a warning saying, you know, you should have done A, B, and C, and they say, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, my bad. What other consequences there can be?
Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our developer in this case is in violation of our highway occupancy permit policy. There are mechanisms in that where we can assess monetary fines through a violation of the bylaw. Typically, we don't enforce that section, but I think if there's a repeat offender, and this appears to be one, I think it merits further involvement.
So you will follow up on that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay, thank you. And Mr. Brady, obviously.
We have an opportunity coming up in the not too distant future, which is our developers roundtable. And typically at the developers roundtable, we listen from the developers as to what their concerns are, but that doesn't mean that it can't go in both directions. So one of the things that we may want to bring up at that developers roundtable, I'm taking a note of it, is this repeat of closing roads without comment. So if council sees fit, I'll simply add that to their agenda.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. Everybody's shaking their head, yes. Yes, even the mayor.
And
All
the
right.
mayor most particularly.
Yes, okay. Any other new business or inquiries? Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, this isn't the only developer that's closing roads without authorization, but most of them don't have the history that this particular development has. I wanted to raise the question about the Albany Street Stormwater Management Pond, which now has some landscaping. And I'm wondering if at some point it might be appropriate to have a public meeting to talk about a number of things relative to that particular stormwater management pond, but to others, relative to levels of service, what residents can expect, what have you. And then also, on this particular one, we should be talking about the access from the neighborhood that has been blocked off, and get some feedback from residents on that as well, and find out what steps we might need to take in order to open that up so that the public has access, but the neighbors have at least some semblance of privacy. So I wonder if Mr. Walsh could take that under advisement and maybe address it at the next subcommittee meeting?
Bring it up or ask them for?
Discussion about it.
Do you want to ask them for a report? Maybe make a motion?
No, just maybe some forward movement with respect to some recommendations regarding a public meeting relative to the stormwater management ponds.
Mr. Walsh, can you accommodate us?
Yes, we can talk about that at next subcommittee meeting. It'd be an appropriate place there.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more Any other comments? New business, inquiries? Seeing none. Infrastructure services, I'm sorry, we'll have to go to the business status report. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, infrastructure services now in recess. I'll turn the chair back to Mayor Redekop.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lubberts. That then takes us to corporate and community services. This policy, Councillor Dubanow, is yours. I don't know if you wanted someone else to chair this, because I imagine you want to speak to it. It's up to you.
No, I'm okay chairing
Ask
this.
questions about it. Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm okay chairing this if you're okay with that, Your
Yeah,
Worship.
absolutely.
Okay. So in that case, Corporate and Community Services is now open. We have one report, and that is CAO-30-2019, the whistleblower policy. Can I get a mover for that? Councillor Zanko, do we have any comments or questions? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I just wanted to say that it was a well-written report by Ms. Morden. There were a couple of things, though, and I'm just wondering if perhaps we can ask some questions with respect to it. I didn't see a statement, and maybe I just didn't see it, and maybe Ms. Morden can point that out to me. I didn't see a statement in the policy that imposes a duty on the employees to report suspected or intended misconduct as well. I just saw actual.
Ms. Morden, do you want to come up?
Thank you for the question. You are probably correct on that. It may not identify suspected, and the reason for that is, well, first of all, I should say, if there is something suspected, an employee can always bring any sort of concern forward. And this particular policy deals with serious wrongdoing. So there would be a process in place to first identify whether or not the complaint being brought forward is serious wrongdoing. Should it be serious wrongdoing, we would follow the steps in this policy. If the complaint was something else of a lesser nature or anything like that, we already have policies in place here at the town that would cover those sorts of issues to still have an investigation done on an action.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, Ms. Morden, I didn't notice, there was no mention of an employee who was acting in good faith and reasonable belief that they're allowed the right of refusal to carry out any order or direction which is illegal, unethical, or against company policy. Is there an opportunity to put that in there?
Can you give me an example? Sorry, to you, through the chair, to you,
Yes.
Councillor Butler. Could you provide me with an example?
Well, off the top of my head, if an employee was being directed by a supervisor or a superior and the direction was either unethical or it was illegal, there is no mention within the policy that allows that person to refuse that direction and then to take the opportunity to make that complaint and be a whistleblower.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering if we could add that in.
Okay. It is something that I can definitely look into. Thinking of our current policies that we have in place, we do have a code of conduct, and which covers integrity as well, which is very similar to what you're speaking about, but we can definitely look at covering it in this policy as well.
Thanks. And if I may, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I wonder if there's also a section that you can speak to with respect to dealing with law enforcement or testifying against a member of the organization. Is there an opportunity to add that in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Butler. I can take a look at that. Just so that I'm clear, you're referring to an enforcement officer testifying against no. I see you shaking your head no.
Sorry. What I mean is that if If the infraction is of a serious nature and the person feels that it is within their rights, their legal obligation to report it to law enforcement as opposed to coming to someone within the municipality, there is no direction that's given within the policy itself. You might have another policy that deals with that, I don't know. But it might not be in our best interest to exclude that.
Okay.
So maybe we might want to take a look at that as well.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Butler, this policy is specific to employees bringing forward complaints. So if an employee had a complaint of serious wrongdoing and brought it to, and it does identify in the policy who they should bring it to, there is the option of their direct manager, but ideally it should be brought to either the chief administrative officer or to the manager of employment services. Are you asking that bylaw be an addition?
No, sorry, not bylaw. It's an
You're talking a
opportunity for
criminal-
the employee, right. It's
Okay.
an opportunity for you to say to the employee, if you feel that this is a criminal nature and you feel the need to go to law enforcement, the regional police or whoever that body might be, it doesn't actually give them any direction within the policy of how you handle that as an organization. And so it might be something to look at as well.
Okay. We do identify the criminal activity, so I'll make sure that that's clear.
Also, the other thing that I did not see in any section was with respect to the right to anonymity, to be able to provide information anonymously so that you can take appropriate action and do your own investigation internally as soon as you hear about a matter.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Butler. There is a clause in here about anonymous complaints that come forward. Typically, so I guess I'm going to speak about this in two ways. Typically, an allegation that would come forward, although we are talking about confidentiality in this policy in respect to protecting the individual that comes forward, we would need to gain information from them to obviously investigate. So the more information that we have, the better investigation that can be done. In respect to someone not wanting to fully participate and just providing us with some details, we would still go ahead with an investigation with the amount of information that we do have. Should someone choose to come forward completely anonymously without attaching their name, again, it is covered in the policy that we would be doing an investigation based on the information that we have at hand.
I didn't see the language to that effect. That was
It's under 7, allegations, specifically 7.2.
Okay, thank you. And I didn't see that. I have, if Mr. Chair, if I may, I just have
Yes.
another section. This is my last one. I just wondered if, I didn't see a definition for lawful authority or for misconduct. Is that something that you would provide in a different policy that would be attached to this, or is there room to put a definition for those two criterias?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Butler. I believe this is the policy where we should cover that. So if it's not currently in here, we will make sure that that is a definition that is identified.
That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Butler, you had made several suggestions. Did you want to move that those be included in an amended report, or how did you want to, or did you want to refer this to staff, or how did you want to go about it?
I'm indifferent as long as it gets captured. Maybe we have it deferred to you and you rewrite it and it comes back to council for approval. Maybe that's the best way to handle it.
Okay.
So the next step is bylaw. So what we would have to do is have staff advise us what changes were made or what the response to your questions is if it's not included in the policy. and the bylaw could be amended if there's something that's missing.
Okay. So let me get some clarification here. So staff has received that information, so then we'll be proceeding to include what has been discussed here tonight in the bylaw before it comes to council, before we vote on the final bylaw. Is that correct?
Or there'll be an explanation as to why not. So
Okay.
as an example, the issue about the employee refusing work, there's provincial legislation that protects an employee in that regard. We've got occupational health and safety policies, so that may be something that, so as an example, comes back for bylaw. There may be something in the bylaw that deals with that, or there may not be, but if not, there will be an explanation as to why not, because it's in another policy. So are you following what we're talking about? So there were
I
5
am,
points
yes.
raised by Councillor Butler,
Yes.
which you would need to address. And if you didn't get all of the information, Councillor Butler can provide that to you.
Thank you.
And if, Councillor Butler.
Just as a point of reference, though, in the policy, maybe, as the mayor was speaking and as you had mentioned, there are other policies that are related to this or that can be integrated to this. Maybe we can list them on this particular policy so that there's reference to it. And if there's something missing from this particular policy and if an investigation does ever happen, and the MOL is involved or the police are involved, they can have reference to those other policies, and it's referred in there for the employee's purpose as well. Might be helpful. But I can send you my points so that,
Thank you.
and I'll email them to you.
Okay.
Councillor Butler, if you would like to refer this to staff formally and put that on the floor to vote, I'm perfectly fine if you want to move that, if that's something you'd prefer. It's completely up to you, or if you're comfortable with doing it this way, we can do it this way as well. It's the ball is up.
I
in
mean,
your
if
court.
everybody's comfortable in passing this along and having Tammy put some points in it, I'm good with that as
Okay.
well. I trust Tammy, so.
All right.
Any other questions? Councillor Lubberts and then his worship.
Yes, just for some clarification, Mr. Chair. I'm reading what we're doing here, and we're being asked to approve the policy as recommended. And I'm thinking that if we've approved this, then staff goes back and makes a bylaw. If we want changes, now's the time to make the amendment, or either that or postpone this and delay this for the next meeting so that staff can prepare the bylaw. But I'm not comfortable with voting on it tonight, according to what I'm reading here, because we're approving it tonight.
And Councillor Lubberts, would you like to move that we refer this to staff to include these recommendations in a subsequent
Well,
report?
I'd like to get some clarification from the clerk whether I'm right or wrong here, but I don't think we can. We'd have to reconsider if we want to make changes after we vote on it.
I think we can do that at the bylaw stage, but if you want to put that on the floor to move, I mean, but that's fine.
Let me speak before he does that. 'cause
Certainly,
that's
yes.
certainly a tie to your way to go. Then we've got the answers in case you don't agree with the responses, you can question. So that would be appropriate. I just had 2 or 3 points that I wanted to ask you about.
Go ahead, Your Worship.
So, thank you. So the purpose of this bylaw, policy is clear. It's to protect employees from reprisal. So my question goes to the issue of the anonymous allegations. The employee isn't being protected if it's anonymous, because we don't know who the employee is. So how does that actually square with the anonymous allegations?
Ms. Morton.
For you, Chair, to Mayor Redekop. So I see an anonymous complaint being one that is maybe going to be put in writing, but there's no name attached to it. I think that's the best protection because there is no name attached. So the anonymous is definitely in the sense of what that would mean. in respect to someone coming forward and putting their name to it, that is what this policy speaks to, that that would be kept confidential, and it would only be at the very highest level of this corporation that that information would be known. And that's why we really kept it tight, so that the individuals that would be involved are that of more of a senior management level. And so I think that answers your question in respect to how we would protect the individual. But it goes even a step further than that. The whole point of this policy is that individuals feel free to come forward with concerns and complaints that they may have about the town and or their supervisor or manager who may be doing something of a serious wrongdoing. And when we spoke about this policy a number of months ago, we discussed the fact that the best time to put a policy in place is truly when you don't have issues within your corporation, because then we have time to work on the things that we're talking about today. And how do we make this policy make sense, and how do we make sure that we're covering everything? So if there's something in addition that you would like to see in the policy, I can definitely take that under consideration.
Well, I'm still just having some difficulty, because if we look at paragraph 7.1, which deals with allegations, it says, any individual who makes an allegation of serious wrongdoing must provide sufficient evidence to substantiate the allegation. So earlier on in the policy, there's a provision that, there's a definition that says disclosure means an oral or written document. I would have thought that this would be a written assertion of, or allegation, where the individual will be identified. Then there's a clear need for that employee to be protected, because the employee has identified him or herself and has clearly stated what the allegations are. Because there's a flip side to this, and that is the individual who's alleged to have violated or committed a serious wrongdoing. Person isn't entitled to know who blew the whistle, but I think in fairness, the individual should at least be aware that there were credible allegations made by somebody with respect to a course of conduct that constitutes serious wrongdoing. Otherwise, we've got situations where people hide behind anonymity and may or may not be credible. And so we'll have the potential for the individuals who receive these complaints, the supervisors or higher up, chasing around something that may or may not be a legitimate allegation or assertion. So I definitely support the notion of A, protecting employees, and B, making sure that if there are wrongdoings being committed, that we have the ability to deal with them without jeopardizing the individuals from coming forward. But I would think that we'd be looking at best evidence. And when we get complaints here, we get bylaw complaints periodically. Sometimes they're oral, sometimes they're written. Nobody signs a name. And usually if we look into it a little bit, we find out that there's a side to the particular story. So I'm a little concerned about the anonymity aspect, because we're not protecting anybody if they're anonymous. The whistleblower policy doesn't deal with that. So that's a concern that I've got, and maybe you could turn your mind to that between now and whenever this comes back, presuming that Councillor Lubberts will move that it be deferred. The other point that I wanted to ask, and that's following up on Councillor Butler's question, an employee, instead of making a complaint or an allegation to a supervisor or whoever, decides to go directly to the police. That really isn't covered by this policy at all, because they haven't fallen within the purpose of the policy, which is to protect an employee who discloses a serious wrongdoing to someone in the municipal administration.
Correct. So if the
Just something
complaint,
further you can think about, I guess.
if the complaint does not come directly to us, you're right, we are not able to protect them. If it's of a criminal nature and they choose to bypass the town and go directly to the police, this policy would mean nothing in that respect. If they bring the complaint to us of a criminal nature, we're protecting them under the whistleblower policy, and we're providing them with the advice of where to go to, whether it's the police or whatever the case may be. So I believe that's covered in the policy, but I'll definitely read that section again to make sure that it fully covers what you're asking me to address.
Well, I think to make sure that the employees understand that they may be depriving themselves of the protection of the whistleblower policy once it's passed, I think we should make it clear to employees that if they want this protection, they can make their complaint through the policy, and then whoever the complaint is made to will take it to the police if that's necessary. But if you go to the police directly, you're depriving yourself of protection entirely, because the police will have to rely upon you to give evidence with respect to whatever the wrongdoing is.
Absolutely. And if another part, when this policy is approved by council, in addition to ensuring that every employee has a copy of it, we'll also be doing communication and training on it. So that's where we can definitely address those issues.
So, thank you.
Perfect. But before I come back to Councillor Butler, I'm just wondering if anyone has not spoke yet on this, if they'd like to speak. Okay, and then in that case, I'll come back to Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to the mayor's point with respect to anonymity, I think that an issue can be resolved if we create a form that's attached to this policy. And since you're going to be training the employees with respect to what this policy really is about, if they choose to be anonymous, they need to fill out a certain form so that you can get the pertinent information. And I really do believe, I've done a number of investigations now for different employers, but during the course of an anonymous tip and during the course of your investigation, you do find witnesses that will either collaborate or not with respect to that. And most times, 9 times out of 10, you do end up finding out who the person is through that investigation. So.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask the clerk just for the verification on what I brought up earlier as to whether we can go forward with this without making the amendments or deferring it, or if we approve this, we'll have to do reconsideration later.
I spoke to the CAO, and we recommend that this report be postponed, and it can just be postponed to the next regular council meeting of October 21st. And then Ms. Morden can include the additions requested, and she could prepare, we could append a memo to the report that clearly outlines what her additions are.
So, Councillor Lubberts, would you like to move
Yeah,
that?
I'd like to make that motion that we postpone till our next, it would be our next council and committee meeting?
The next regular council meeting
Regular
of
council?
November.
Okay, all right, I'll make that motion.
Well, I have a problem with the timing, because I don't think we should be approving a report and passing a bylaw the same night. So that if we're going to be, because there may be some changes that we're still going to want to debate, and I don't think it's good policy to be doing them both on the same night. The next council and committee meeting is November the 4th, which is, so it's going to delay this by a month.
Yeah, no, I'm.
It wouldn't bother me to delay a month.
So
Okay.
November the 4th is your motion?
Yeah, we'll go to the next council and committee meeting.
Okay, so we have on the floor right now to postpone the report to our next council and committee meeting on November 4th. Do we have any other questions or comments with respect to timing? All right, so seeing none, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? So none opposed, so that is postponed. All right, so moving right along. We have no other reports, so that brings us to new business or inquiries. Do we have any? All right. Seeing none, so that'll move us on to the business status reports. Any questions, comments? All right. So in that case, Corporate and Community Services is now closed, and I will return the chair back to his worship.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. Are there any meetings that anyone wishes to announce this evening? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. There is a 40 not-for-profit housing meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the Lakeview on Concession Street. There is also an accessibility meeting on October 29th in Conference Room 1. There's also a traffic coordinating meeting on October 30th at noon, and there's a planning development meeting on the 31st. 9.
What's the meeting on the 31st? I'm sorry.
Planning and Development Services is at 9 a.m.
Thank you. Any other meetings? Then motion to adjourn. Oh, Councillor Dubanow, your hand was up first. All those in favor? That is carried. You were eager.